Hello there. Here we are with the bonus issue for issue 43. Let's go ahead and talk about the heavy cruiser Malevolence. So you would have seen Malevolence um, in the Clone Wars show. So it is called a Subjudicator class heavy cruiser. It's 4,845 meters long. It's got it's got twin ion pulse cannons, two of them. Twin turbo laser batteries, there's 500 of those. Tractor beams, there's two tractor beam batteries. Point defense lasers, cannon batteries, there's 5 of those. And 900 crew, which are all battle droids. Alright, so this thing lives up to its name. So it was designed by Ruggles Schmong and built by Quarren Separatists on Pament. The Malevolence was the first of only 2 examples of the Subjudicator class heavy cruiser using a design initially discarded by the galaxy spanning Sorosub Corporation. The vast ship measured blah blah blah, built in the cavernous dry dock far away from prying eyes of the Republic spies. Malevolence was constructed with the express purpose of raining the heaviest of fire down upon the forces, bases, and soldiers of the Republic. The new vessel was quickly installed as a flagship of General Grievous, a terrifying sight for any starship commander who strayed too close. She was longer than 4 Venator-class star destroyers, with the powerful ion cannons mounted on both port and starboard side of the vessel. You had a ship worthy of being feared. So basically, there's 2 major, these 2 huge ion cannons um, with the ship built around it, essentially. And so a lot of the ship was built just to power that. So uh, so vast was the Malevolence that this near 5-kilometer long ship had a full internal rail jet to transport crew, ammunition, and cargo along the enormous craft. She was powered by 16 hefty sublight engines, while her hyperdrive was one of the most powerful ever built, and could propel the Malevolence around the galaxy at great speeds. When her commander preferred to capture an enemy rather than destroy it, the cruiser's dual tractor beam system had the capacity to pull the largest starships towards the ship and into one of the docking bays inside. So the primary weapon was the pair of the twin ion cannons, were the most important of the Malevolence's offensive weapons. Energy wave produced when they fired expanded over distance, disabling enemy ships on impact. The 500 turbo lasers mounted on the Malevolence hull were then free to pick off the stricken prey. So basically, you use ion cannon, then they'd shut down all the ships that got caught in the blast, and then they would just come by and just kill everybody. So that was pretty interesting. The ion cannons required a lot of power, but any surplus energy stored within the ship's vast hull had to be regularly vented, and it was this that fed the ion cannons. A secondary power plant inside the ship captured waste heat or any byproducts created by the propulsion of the vessel and filtered it through the cannons. So support vessels. General Grievous' flagship didn't travel alone. Along with its own starfighter, the Solus One, the Malevolence boasted a complement of Ultra-class fighter droids able to provide a screen to ward off enemy fighters, and it also carried at least one Drakk-class boarding ship known as Pod Hunters. These craft were crewed by a squad of rocket battle droids designed to destroy any enemy escape pods and leave no survivors. So, yeah, so basically they would knock them out, and if a ship had fired off escape pods, then those escape pods would be, knocked out as well. And then this Drakk class boarding ship would just come up, and it would just basically pierce the hull, or whatever, and whoever was inside would die. Vacuum of space and all that kind of stuff. So basically, it was the way that they set this up was they essentially would make sure that they killed everybody that had come across it. So um, essentially, the Republic had no clue what even the weapon was. They just knew that after a battle where this thing was, like, uh, everybody would be dead, and they couldn't quite figure it out. So even so, the first flight of the Malevolence on the space lanes was quickly spotted by Republic forces eager to nullify the threat before it got out of hand. Jedi Master Plo Koon dispatched several Venator-class cruisers to locate and destroy the superweapon. Grievous was one step ahead, and the task force came under intense fire at the Battle of Fu system, where she took out 3 Star Destroyers, while on the instructions of Count Dooku, the Republic's transmissions were blocked to keep the new vessel a secret. Shortly after this engagement, the Battle of Abrigado saw Count Dooku try his hardest to stop any survivors reporting details about the Malevolence, but thanks to the actions of Anakin Skywalker, Plo Koon, the existence of Malevolence became known. So yeah, so they were trying to keep it secret. That's why they would block transmissions and all that kind of stuff, and hide the fact of what had actually had happened. So it was quite interesting. So the end of the threat. Such was the threat posed by the Separatist flagship that the Republic went all out to stop her. Meanwhile, the Separatists sought to prolong her reign of terror. At the Battle of Rendeli system, General Grievous ambushed a Republic medical convoy before attacking a station holding 60,000 wounded clone troopers. Fortunately for the Republic, the Battle of Khalidi Nebula ended in the ultimate destruction of the Malevolence at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Padme Amidala, and Anakin Skywalker. Without doubt, the loss of the ship was a blow to the plans of Darth Sidious and the Separatist movement, and a poor return for such a vast investment of time and resources. So there you go. Now, for the behind the scenes, this is quite interesting. So the inspiration, according to the Clone Wars director Dave Filoni, the concept behind the Malevolence was influenced by World War II's German battleship Bismarck. Together with her sister ship Tirpitz, the threat posed by these massive, heavily armed warships dominated Allied naval planning. In the case of the Bismarck, her career lasted just 8 months, but in the Battle of Denmark Strait, she sank the mighty battlecruiser HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, in an engagement that lasted barely 10 minutes. Damaged by shots from the battleship HMS Prince of Wales, Bismarck was hunted high and low by the naval force that included 6 capital ships, 2 aircraft carriers, 13 cruisers, and 21 destroyers before she was crippled by torpedo bombers. Unable to maneuver, she was bombarded by hundreds of shells and multiple torpedoes fired from multiple British ships, and finally sank after she was scuttled by her own crew on 27 May 1941. So the Bismarck, I mean, it took a lot to take that thing down, but it was quite the threat. If you haven't heard the song by Johnny Horton, uh, "Gotta Sink the Bismarck," it's kind of a fun song. It's a bit of an older song, but I kind of grew up listening to it, and it's kind of fun. Kashyyyks Fight for Freedom. Now this one was rather interesting as well. So 4 millennia before the Battle of Yavin, the unethical, opportunistic Circa Corporation discovered the planet Kashyyyk and the great strength of the native Wookiees. They renamed the planet G5623, later calling it Eden, and enslaved the populace for the first time in its long history, until enraged Wookiee warriors united and won their world back. Although their first encounter with the wider galaxy had been an unfortunate experience, the Wookiees became more and more involved in interplanetary matters, and Kashyyk later opted to join the Republic after having more peaceful dealings with Corellians, Verpine, and Alderaanians. Center of Technology. To view the Wookiees purely as laborers, as their captors had done, was to ignore their great intelligence and creativity. While Kashyyyk might seem as unlikely setting for advanced industry under the Republic, it became respected galaxy-wide for its contributions to technology and the art of mapping hyperspace routes. Some of this was centered around Rorkoro, uh, the planet's capital, but the cities of Tikiana and Kachiro were of equal importance. The latter became the center of hyperspace mapping on the planet, a skill the Wookiees developed to great effect, while Tikina was the technological hub of the planet. So one of the reasons why it became very important is because it was a galactic crossroads. So this talks about how all, several issues ago, we kind of went through all the different hyperspace lanes and everything. Well, essentially from Kashyyyk, you could go, basically it was like they said, it's at the crossroads. So it had hyperspace lanes going east, west, north, south. So like you pick a direction, you can hit a hyperspace lane, and every hyperspace lane that you hit, you could link up with another major hyperspace lane. So it literally was a crossroad that allowed for quicker travel and all that kind of stuff. So pretty interesting. Proud to be members of the Republic. Wookiee senators represented Kashyyyk in the Galactic Senate for millennia until the outbreak of the Clone Wars was followed by the rise of the Empire, with Kashyyyk having opted to side with the Republic during the Clone Wars. The treatment of the Wookiees was harsh and brutal, leading once again to the planet and its people being enslaved. So, one of the things about the Empire they don't really get into too much, particularly in the movies, is that um, it was very xenophobic. So essentially, you're only going to see humans essentially serving in the Empire. Anybody that was not human were considered lesser beings. They were used for slave labor and all that kind of stuff. It was extremely rare for somebody that was not human to actually serve in the Empire and be respected at any point within the Empire. I mean, the most they would use would be bounty hunters and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of important to note and realize. The Transdoshans, the more recent history of the Wookiees, was inextricably bound up with that of their near neighbors, the Trandoshans. And Trandoshans is the creature Bosk. He was one of the bounty hunters that was on the Star Destroyer in Empire Strikes Back. He's the one that everybody loved, the reptilian type thing, and this is what they kind of look like here. Let me show you that. And if I can find a picture of that where Bosca is at, I'll share that as well. During the Clone Wars and the Separatist occupation of Kashyyyk, the Trandoshans were only too happy to play the role of slave masters for the CIS, hunting and capturing the furred behemoths in a deadly game of lizard versus mammal. The Trandoshans established several permanent slave camps. With their deep enmity of the Wookiees, could be expected to side with the Separatists in any skirmish that took place. Eventually, the incursions and probing attacks led to a full-scale Separatist invasion that began with the landing of a secret force of battle droids that culminated in the Battle of Kashyyyk at the city of Kicharo. The lengthy and bitterly fought battle saw the Republic clones forces beaten back on several fronts, while the Trade Federation blockade ensured that no reinforcements could get through. Then the Republic forces rallied and the Separatists were pushed back, but the tide of battle turned both ways until a bitter fate intervened. Just as the clones appeared to be about to win, the galaxy-wide issuing of Order 66 saw the clone troopers turn on the Jedi and massacre their former leaders. Suddenly, the forces sent to protect the planet became its invaders. Some of the clones even began killing Wookiees before they pulled out of the system. After the fall of the Republic, the Trandoshans found an opportunity to further box in the Wookiee enemies by suggesting to the Empire that the Wookiees would make great slave labor. The Empire agreed, and the Trandoshans began to lead regular slaving raids on the planet to bolster the Empire's workforce requirements. So this one here is kind of talking about. There was an episode in Rebels where Ahsoka was somehow she got captured by some Trandoshans, and that what they would do is they would capture people all around the galaxy or whatever, and then they would take them to their planet, I guess, some planet anyway, and they would essentially just leave them out there on their own, and then they'd hunt them down for sport. And Ahsoka actually met Chewbacca because Chewbacca ended up getting captured, and so yeah, so she actually got to meet Chewbacca in that episode, so that's kind of cool. Our behind the scenes digital armies. A key battle in the Revenge of the Sith takes place on Kashyyyk, and filming this involved a vast amount of work and time. The huge, hairy bodies of the Wookiees would test the skills of both the costume and digital animation departments, and Rob Coleman, director of animation, explained how he shot just 6 actors in costume against blue screen, and he took multiple passes, varying the angle, actions, and the weapons they were holding to give a basis that could be built up to look like dozens of Wookiees, blended with purely digital renders that appeared to be an entire army but took weeks to put together. So there you go. So yeah, that's what they would how they ended up doing all the Wookiees. Pretty interesting. Um, so there you go with that. Now we're going to talk about types of atmosphere. So this one, we'll just kind of cruise through this one a little bit. So you have the breathable gases, right? And it's all fairly standard stuff. So breathable gases allow for to sustain life and all that kind of stuff. The makeup of the planet's atmosphere partly depends on the chemistry of the star system that formed the original world, and partly on what gases have subsequently been released from the interior, such as by volcanic activity or created by the activity of the inhabitants. There are standard classifications for atmospheres which many space travelers follow. This system divides the world into 4 different categories depending on what precautions may be needed after landing. Although that varies from one species to another, what oxygen-loving beings consider pleasant or even tolerable could prove poisonous to an ammonia or methane breather and vice versa. So the first one we have is the Type 1 atmosphere. This covers the majority of the sentient and other species in the galaxy have the biochemistry based on carbon. If you're based in carbon, then this is going to fit pretty well for you. With water as a solvent, they normally involved in atmospheres that contain mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen. That's what we have. Although such atmospheres may contain small amounts of other trace gases, planets with the type of atmosphere have almost always developed some forms of indigenous life. So that's important to note. So yeah, so basically Earth would be a type 1 planet. Uh, so yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. Now this talks about it's worth noting that all planets with a type 1 atmosphere rely on their air being naturally refreshed by plants or some other chemical mechanism that frees oxygen and recycles it into breathable form. So plants, algae, stuff like that is what does it, and I think algae is technically a form of plant. I'm not sure, but that's what gives us oxygen. It uses carbon dioxide and that kind of stuff, and it makes it in, and water makes it into oxygen. So there you go. Class 2, you have to use a breathe mask, or at the very least, it's recommended to use a breathe mask. Okay, and essentially, it's fits a lot of the same stuff as a Type 1, but it's going to have pollution and other things that's going to cause other issues. May have a higher concentration of some of these other trace gases. May have higher concentrations and that kind of stuff. Um, a type 3, you have to have a breathe mask is absolutely essential, as opposed to being uh, uh, recommended as in here. So you just have to have a breathe mask. Now the thing is that uh, it's important to note that although you have to have a breathe mask, you don't have to wear a space suit or some sort of biological suit that protect you, because type 3 atmosphere will affect what does it say? Oxygen breathing species. The possible harmful effects mean that a breathe mask has to be worn, but as there are no elements in a type 3 atmosphere that will affect exposed skin or other tissue, an environmental suit is not necessary. You get to a type 4 and you have to wear an environmental suit. And so that is where you have to wear a full suit that's sealed up and all that kind of stuff to be able to go there. And of course, it goes back and forth um, when you start talking about it, whether they're ammonia breathers or maybe hydrogen breathers or whatnot. So um, now you get into gas giants. It talks about gas giants, where they're basically all gas, all the different types of gas and all that kind of stuff. So that's important to note. Now, the Thai pilots and all them, their suit basically acted as their kind of spacesuit or whatever. Their helmets had this apparatus here for their oxygen and stuff. And part of that was because they did not have, to save um, weight and all that kind of stuff, and power. The TIE fighters didn't have any kind of, it wasn't a pressurized atmosphere within the ship. They had to have these to be able to breathe while flying a TIE fighter and whatnot. So here we go for our behind the scenes. Researchers investigating the possibility that life evolved somewhere else in the universe or even elsewhere in the solar system have suggested that it might not need to depend on an atmosphere like our own. Before 1977, when the hydrothermal vents deep in the Earth's ocean floors began to be explored, scientists believed that all life forms depended on the sun's energy. But the new ecosystems in the sunless regions at the bottom of the sea proved to be based on microbes that derived their energy directly from the chemicals in the superheated water bubbling up out of the earth, a process called chemosynthesis. So, like plants use photosynthesis and they use the energy from the sun to help them convert water and whatnot into oxygen and energy. Um, Here we go. Where were we? Chemosynthesis. So this uses chemicals. Deep sea bacteria can process hydrogen sulfide and other normally noxious chemicals at temperatures and pressures that would kill most living things. Scientist Bob Verjohoek described this as the first of life as we don't know it, as well as our neighbor Mars. The most promising bodies in the solar system where primitive life might exist are now thought to include some of the moons on Jupiter and Saturn, which are large enough to support some sort of an atmosphere. Of course, the moons in Jupiter and Saturn would be too cold. It would be pretty much frozen. Um, so yeah, the gas giants, they're going to have a molten rock kind of uh, uh, core and all that kind of stuff. So alternative atmospheres. So some uh, asteroids might have some sort of an atmosphere or whatever, but then you're going to have creatures that are not carbon based. They would be uh, silicone based, and the silicone based creatures don't need the atmosphere. So the space slug, which is what went after the Millennium Falcon in Empire Strikes Back, and also the Minox. They were in that cave, um, so they didn't need to have normal breathable atmospheres. Um, there are also life forms that breathe gases other than oxygen. For example, the Gand species of whom the bounty hunter Zuckus, that's him here, is a well-known example. They breathe ammonia as a constituent of atmospheres of many gas giants. The compound of nitrogen and hydrogen is caustic and slightly toxic to most other species. It is worth noting that the Gand have two subspecies, one of which does not breathe at all, but draws its sustenance by absorption from its food intake and speaks by modulating the sound of its flatulence. So that's pretty snazzy and sexy, isn't it? So yeah, that pretty much covers it. And this is talking about how even though the T-65 X-wing it did have life support and atmosphere within the ship. The helmets had these atmosphere converters or these conversion regulators that were fitted around the facial opening of the flight helmets and that kind of stuff. So AT-ATs and the ARC-70s and TIEs, they didn't have atmosphere into the cabs and stuff. So if they were someplace that did not have a breathable atmosphere, then they wouldn't be able to. They'd have to have helmets and that kind of stuff there. So that is going to cover everything in this issue. So that was pretty cool. Here, next issue, we're going to have issue 44. We're going to get this piece here, and this is going to be one of the rear pieces right before the engine outlet. And then we're going to get some parts that's going to be, I think it's going to go onto this or something. So this is going to be some of the kind of decorative parts on the back. We're going to get the cone parts for the other gun turret and all the parts for that. So we may be doing the gun turret. Who knows? So hopefully you stick around for issue 44, and hopefully you're still enjoying this. Again, I want to point everyone to Star Wars Newsnet YouTube channel. 2 times a week, they do like a podcast type thing. You can find them on podcasts. It's called the Resistance Broadcast. You can find their broadcasts or their podcasts, usually about an hour, somewhere between an hour and 10 minutes. Sometimes they go a little longer, sometimes a tad bit shorter. Sometimes they do interviews with people from Star Wars. So they've talked to, recently they talked to one of the lead special effects guys, Hal Hinton, I think, or Hintel. They talked to him, which was an interesting interview, and that one was that was like an hour and a half at least. So usually when they do the interviews, they do go a tad bit longer, but they have some interesting discussions, ask some interesting questions. They talk about Star Wars news and all that kind of stuff throughout the process. So definitely recommend you checking that out. Check the description down below. I'll have a link to that channel. I'm highly recommending that. So if you're into Star Wars and you want to kind of get a solid source of information as well as maybe some decent conversation, then that's a place to go check it out. So with that, I'm going to say thank you all very much for watching. If you like this, be a friend and tell a friend. Let them know about the Falcon stuff, and if you think they're gonna enjoy watching it, then definitely share it with them. I'd be much appreciated. And again, thank you very much. May the Force be with you always.